I've had some time to observe the ecosystem of think tanks in DC, and I have a pretty good idea by now of how they operate. Most of them focus on the big hot topics in front of Congress or in the news, and as a result they get plenty of attention on funding to work on those particular topics. But there's a much smaller field that's gotten me excited lately, and as I start to think vaguely about what I might want to get a master's degree in or what the next step in my professional life might look like, I've been getting pretty good at trying to articulate why I think it's important. So today I want to explain to you why exactly I'm so passionate about it. So please tell me if this makes any sense, because my future career may depend on it. Okay, so what does freedom of religion look like exactly? Most of you are 21st century Westerners for whom this isn't really a problem, and, whatever you believe in is generally agreed upon to be a personal matter. Some of you maybe grew up in a part of the country where it was a little strange to be raised Catholic or Muslim or without religion, but as long as people respected your right to privately believe what you want to, you are left alone, and there's no problem, right? But I would argue that there's a really big and important difference between religious freedom and mere freedom of worship or freedom of belief or freedom of conscience or whatever you want to call it. And here's why. So a few years ago, China made it illegal for Buddhist monks to reincarnate without the government's permission. I know it sounds crazy, but if you think about the Dalai Lama and his opposition to Chinese imperialism in Tibet, it makes sense. In the same way, China recently decided that it can just appoint its own Catholic bishops without the permission of the Vatican, and that's caused its whole other set of issues, but back to Tibet. So outlawing reincarnation doesn't really have anything to do with freedom of worship or even of belief. It's just kind of a religious thing that happens. But as we've seen in the last couple of decades, it's also a very important tool that the Chinese government uses to control potentially rebellious groups of people. You just can't argue that that's not restricting religious freedom. And this is where language is so important. If you merely define it as freedom of worship or freedom of belief, then you ignore all these other instances where religious freedom, a fundamental human right, is being violated. And there are tons of other examples. Lots of post-Soviet countries make it really hard for you to share your religion. In Turkey and also in France, there are very similar restrictions on the wearing of religiously symbolic clothing like Islamic headscarves on government property. So all over the world, from the Americas to West Africa to Southeast Asia, governments may respect your right to believe what you want, but they don't always let you act in reasonable accordance with those beliefs. And more importantly, it's been shown that religious freedom is a red flag on the way to other violations, like journalistic freedom or freedom of assembly, or judicial rights like the right to a free and fair trial. So I do have a little bit of good news. About 15 years ago, an act of Congress set up a mechanism for the US government to report on and respond to international violations of religious freedom. There's an office at the State Department, and there's an independent commission that's overseen by Congress. Unfortunately, in the last few years, for reasons of what we might call diplomatic sensitivity, religious freedom hasn't exactly been a priority for the administration. So as a result, those two separate bodies have either scaled back their operations or been issuing contradictory reports and policy recommendations on the topic. So part of the problem is that somehow international religious freedom has come to be seen as just a right-wing issue, or else it's an issue for very religious people when members of their own group are being persecuted somewhere. I hope I've been able to show you that that's not true. Whether or not their governments hear them at the same volume, atheists in Saudi Arabia deserve the same dignity as Muslims in Germany. So what do you think? Is this actually an issue that deserves more attention? Should I try to devote myself to convincing people of that professionally? I don't know. Please help me out in the comments. I've also put some good reading material. Also, how is this camera angle? I'm still figuring out how to film in this room. I look forward to hearing from all of you, and thanks.